Hi, and welcome to Simply Happy Conversations. I'm Narelle King, and in this Simply Happy conversation, I'm talking with Rebecca Mezzino, a professional organiser and declutter coach with over 18 years of experience. She shares ideas to support people with complex needs using a person-centred approach. She also talks about the difference between hoarding behaviours and hoarding disorders, misconceptions, and how best to support both. This conversation is a video recording that you can also watch on YouTube. Let's jump into this Simply Happy guest conversation. Welcome to Simply Happy Conversations. I'm Narelle King, wellness and organisational coach and yin and nidra yoga instructor. This podcast will help you create more time using organisational strategies so that you can start to simplify your life and prioritise your health. I'll be sharing conversations with other health and organisational experts and solo episodes with tips to help you simplify your life and prioritise your health. So today on Simply Happy Conversations, I'm talking with Bec Mezzino, a declutter coach, and she has over 15 years of experience helping people to simplify their lives and look at their relationship with their stuff. And so this is the second time I've actually had Bec on the podcast. So it's great to have you back. Welcome, Bec.
Hi, thank you. It's up to 18 years now.
18 years, is it?
I think.
Oh, yeah. I think I just got that from your website.
I'm not very good at updating those kinds of things. Again. And I had someone else introduce me recently and they said 13 years. And I was like, wow, it's been a while since whatever I said her was updated.
18 years.
18 years at the end of this year, yeah.
Ah, so that's amazing. So tell us then, what have you been up to over the last 2 years? Because I think when I had you on last year, you were still doing even 2 years ago, podcast, and you also were just rebranding then.
I was, that's right, yeah. So the old brand ClearSpace, which was the business I started in 2005, that one is largely now being used by my husband for estate clearances and downsizing. And so I did rebrand into just Rebecca Mezzino Declutter Coaching and did a separate website and all that, just so that it was just a bit easier for me to put all the information on that I needed and it wasn't going to get lost somewhere. And same with Mick's stuff, his information about his service wasn't going to get lost amongst mine. So we rebranded there. And I was still doing the podcast. We did finish that one up. Our last episode was our 200th episode. So they're all still available to listen to, but we don't record any new ones. And so, things have changed. So we don't do the podcast anymore. But I'm continuing on with the same kind of work that I've been doing the whole time, really.
So what about the complex needs that you're working with now? How and why did you get into that area and how long has it been sort of?
Oh, I think it's been a good 10 years or more that I've been working in complex cases. And I suppose it ramped up when the NDIS came in because the demand suddenly sort of skyrocketed for an organiser that had a bit of experience in working with people with additional needs and not necessarily, worse needs, for want of a better word, or higher needs, but just different needs and also people that are more vulnerable as well. So there was that increased need. And I think, as far as how I sort of got into that, I guess it's just given how long I've been doing this and how much experience I've got, people tended to come to me as the more experienced one to sort of say, we've got this person needs help, and they might have worked with another organiser that was less experienced and didn't have a great outcome, or they had particular needs and they were sort of like, we need someone who knows this and who knows this and who can do this. And so I just started getting more of that work, and then of course the more you get, the more referrals you get and the more people call you and the more support coordinators are calling me going, hey, and then they've got one client that they work with, so then they ring me up about another one. And then they tell other support coordinators. So it just grew. And so, I think it's because partially, I'm good at it, and also, partially because, the more you do, the more you get, I guess.
Yeah. But you obviously have to have a passion for that area too, though.
I really do. I have a real passion for gentleness and person-centered approaches. And I think that that's particularly important with disability or with any complex needs or with mental health, is that person-centered approach. You can't just have someone come in and say, all right, so you said you've got a problem with your kitchen. I'll just organise it, you stand over there. I'm going to pull everything out. I'm going to ask you, what do you want to use? How long have you used this for? Then I'm going to stick it back in again. All the while I'm going to sort of huff and puff about, how much you've got, how much stuff you've got. And, I'm going to do all of this sort of stuff and say, oh, it's easy, just don't buy it, all those kinds of statements. And that's the kind of approach that someone without experience or without a person-centered approach might take. And that has definitely happened to my clients before with people who aren't trained in more complex cases. And so, it's, I forget your question.
Oh, just like how you got into this, the complex, but even just sharing about the complex needs. And one of the things, though,
I talked so much I forgot if there was a question at the other end.
No, we were just talking about, but it just reminded me of the story you've shared about person-centered approach of the lady in her little room, and I think she had a walking frame. And she was, only had a small area, but you had some trolleys for her and it was considered cluttered. Like, do you want to expand on that? Because I love that story. I think that's a great example of a person-centered approach, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really good example about how somebody who is either not trained or uninformed or doesn't take a person-centered approach can actually do more harm when in an intervention that's not required. So I've got one client, I've been working with her for some time, and we've worked on her sort of certain areas in her home, and we've got it pretty much how she's happy. And it's not, obviously someone else might walk in and go, oh, well, I wouldn't set it up like this, or I wouldn't have my room doing this or whatever. But she's happy with the way it's all set up. And I had the support coordinator email me and said, I'm really worried about, let's call her Sharon, really worried about Sharon. She seems to be bringing more clutter in. She's got all this clutter around her in her chair. And then she started to talk about how, I think it's because she feels like she doesn't have any control. So she's hoarding, and she's hoarding all this stuff, and she's, throwing these words around. And I'm reading this email going, nah. No. And so I emailed the support coordinator back and I said, actually, let me just explain to you what's really going on here with Sharon. One, she's happy. She is comfortable with the way her home is at the moment, and she's safe. I have checked for all of the safety things. I said there were some tripping hazards the last time I went there, which this support coordinator had highlighted to her as well. And I said, so we cleared those in the last session. And I said, the things that you're talking about around her, simply a manifestation of what it's like to live with a disability. And if you have to be in your chair for 20 hours a day, you are not going to want to have to be getting up and going and getting things all the time. When you live in chronic pain, when things are really hard for you, it's hard for you to move, you want everything to be at arm's reach. And so, we set up these trolleys, and she had sort of, she's got everything around her. So she's got her water, and she's got her hand cream, and she's got all her chargers and her remotes, and she's got her diary and some craft things, and everything's around her so she can reach it all. But this support coordinator was like, oh, she's hoarding. I'm like, no, she's just setting up her life so that she's comfortable and she's happy. It looks cluttered to this woman who wouldn't have that in her own home. But if you ask this client, the client's like, this is what I want. And, and that's exactly what, So I had the discussion with the client, and I said, oh, support coordinator said this, this, and this. And the client went, but why? Like, it's fine. And I said, exactly. It's fine. You're fine. And there are a couple of minor things to deal with. The kitchen bench space probably needs to be a little bit clearer and all that. But at the same time, she doesn't cook a lot of her own meals anyway. She can easily make toast and soup, and that's what she eats a lot. So it's all safe. It's all safe. But that's an example. And I have another client as well that had another service come in, and she'd used me before, but this particular funding she was going to get as a bonus, so she wouldn't have to use her NDIS funding for me. She could use this other agency's funding, but this other agency made her use a different organisation to me. And so I warned her, and I said, look, there is a chance here that they could just be cleaners, and nothing bad against cleaners, but they might not be trained in organising for somebody with complex needs. And she messaged me about 6 weeks later, and she said, I'm so glad you warned me about this, because this was awful. It was a horrible experience. They booked her for 5 hours straight away. I'm like, oh my God, 5
hours.
she's autistic and she has anxiety and she's really busy and she's like a really busy family and everything like that. And so they've done this to her. She said after 2.5 hours of being judged and belittled, and having someone else tell her what is meant to happen to her stuff, she just said, I can't do this anymore. And so they left, still charged her for the 5 hours, and still took the whole 5 hours. And I was like, oh, I mean, I understand the business practice of charging for what you've booked, but at the same time, I wouldn't have booked 5 hours.
No, exactly. We both would have said 2 hours is possibly enough for you. Yes. Exactly. And I'm happy to do 2 hours because of that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when I work with this client, I do work with her for 2 hours. Sometimes we've done 3 hours, and what we do is we assess at the 2 hour mark. Like, I'll say to her, and if I've got space, obviously, if I have a client like half an hour after, we can't go longer. But if I say to her, look, we've got time, I've got time for another hour, let's do it. And sometimes I will block away the 3, but we'll recess at 2 and finish at 2.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really necessary when working with people with who are more vulnerable or who have energy issues or get overwhelmed really easily. Like neurodiverse people get overwhelmed, really easily, and it's just a lot. And a lot of people don't consider the fact that, you might be one of 10 appointments that they have that week.
Yeah.
They've only got a certain number of spoons. And if you use all of them up on Monday afternoon doing a 6-hour decluttering thing, they are out for the rest of the week. Like they're not going to be able to fulfill the other things that they want, either their obligations or the fun things that they want to do. That has to be, we have to consider that, there are only so many spoons that people have. And I always assume that they have limited spoons, because assuming that is, and being wrong is better than assuming the other way around.
Definitely.
Limited spoons, then they'll tell me, they'll say, I don't need to stop after 2. Let's go. Like, I'm good. I know how to regulate. I'm cool with that. And then others will be like, yes, I'm pretty sure I can't do more than 2 hours. Then I've had some, and I've also changed my policy recently, and I now have a minimum of 1 hour. And I have a different rate for that hour, because I found that I had a couple of clients who I was losing at 45-minute mark.
Yeah.
And I could see that. And I was like, they're not getting anything out of this. And legally, I was able to charge 2 hours because that was what was in the service agreement. I could charge 2 hours because that was my minimum. And they had agreed to that. And they often verbally would say, you can still charge, But I just felt ethically, working with someone who I know is not going to go over an hour and still booking 2-hour appointments with them, because that's my policy, is not right. So I changed my policy. So I have now some 1 hour. There's requirements, obviously. They can't live miles and miles and miles away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But, and it's a slightly higher rate to sort of compensate for that. But, it does suit few of my clients to just have those 1 hour sessions. And, it's too much for them anymore.
Yep. I have an hour and a half this afternoon, and that's exactly the same reason, because I know we get to the sort of hour, we can do a little bit more, but that's enough. So it's like, let's just do it. An hour and a half. I'm happy with that. And it works. It works for both myself and for the clients. So yes, I think that there's no hard and fast rules, and it's working with the person and their energy and the spoons, really, because you do with complex needs, we do have to look at that. So what about, you touched on a little bit about hoarding behaviours or hoarding disorder that, some people may mention. Tell us a little bit more about it. Define it for us. Because it is a word that is thrown around all the time. Like, I get it all the time when I get an inquiry. Oh, I have hoarding disorder. It's like, hang on, do you have that diagnosed? No, I'm just saying I am. So, yes.
Usually, in that case, if they don't have a diagnosis, they'll say, I am a hoarder. They usually don't use the disorder name, because they kind of don't really know about it, unless they're diagnosed. So you will say, people say, oh, I'm a hoarder, or they'll say, or their support coordinator will call them a hoarder, or their family member will call them hoarder, and they don't necessarily have hoarding disorder. So hoarding disorder is an actual mental illness with a diagnostic criteria that needs to be met before you can have the condition, basically. And it's in the DSM-5. The diagnostic criteria is pretty clear. You have to have the inability to part with possessions regardless of their value. You need to have the behaviour of compulsively acquiring items. You need to have areas of your home most areas of your home unusable for their primary purpose, and that the behaviours all cause significant impairment to life and distress. And so if you meet all those criteria, then hoarding disorder. And also they will check when they're diagnosing whether or not you have another condition that could be the reason why the hoarding behaviours exist before they'll diagnose. So they may sort of say, well, actually, it's the OCD that's doing that. So we won't give you a hoarding disorder diagnosis because OCD seems to be the reason why you're compulsively acquiring, and your trauma is the reason why you're not letting go, or your PTSD is why you're not letting go. So there might be other conditions that cause it. But, overall, if there aren't any other conditions, then hoarding disorder will be the diagnosis. And usually hoarding disorder is, people would have seen it on TV, on the shows. And, it's quite, and it's not always that dramatic. Like people, I have a client with hoarding disorder. I saw her yesterday, and she doesn't live in squalor. The house, there are no pests in the house. There's no odor. There's no smell. It's not like what's on TV. There are really high volumes of stuff, though. And if she even has to consider parting with something, it's significantly distressing for her. So there will be lots of tears, over the idea of getting rid of things. And there are some people with hoarding disorder who can't part with anything, whereas, she can part with some things. It doesn't mean she doesn't have the disorder. We got rid of a whole lot of stuff that had been water damage yesterday, and she was happy she wasn't happy, she was willing to get rid of them. But I could see in the process of her doing that the things that she would take out, there were a couple of things where she actually was really disappointed and really upset that they'd got damaged because she would have kept it. And then there were other things that she sort of went, oh, oops, I ruined that, and she could get rid of it. So there's definitely a spectrum with regards to hoarding disorder, and there is that range. And she is sort of more on the, I guess, as far as her symptoms go, as far as keeping goes, she has those high levels of keeping, but she has a really high motivation to want to change, which is really good. And that is different to what you might see from some of the people on TV. Their motivation for change is often relatively low. Their fear just sort of overtakes it, and they don't want to change, or they turn help away and say, no, I want to deal with this, whereas she help seeks, which is obviously going to help her in the long run if she's motivated to change. But yeah, there's a whole spectrum. So it's not always what you see on TV. It's not always dead cats in the freezer and stuff like that. It's sometimes just a lot of stuff and strong attachment to it, and lots of stuff coming in.
Yes, it's a lot of stuff. Like we might do a lot of work and then we come back the next week and it's like, oh my goodness, I can't keep up. Like there's so much stuff, isn't it?
Unfortunately, especially with hoarding disorder, more comes in than it goes out. And so it's a real battle. Yeah. People working with these people and for the people themselves to try and make some headway, because, these behaviours, a lot of the time they know they're doing them and they know they're harmful. It's the same as everyone else. It's the same as a smoker who looks at the packet where it says, causes lung cancer.
In the picture.
And they pop one in their mouth anyway.
Yeah.
And it's the same with, those of, people that say, oh, I'll just do one more pokies, just a few more bits on the pokies. It's the same kind of thing. It's not good for you, but you can't help it. There's a compulsion there. So, and they can, and, this client in particular has said to me once, she said, I just can't believe how stupid I am. She said, I've bought all this stuff and here we are, working hard, I'm paying for you out of my NDIS funds to come and throw out stuff, and here I am showing you all the things that I brought home.
Yeah,
and I'm like, it's part of the mental illness.
Yes, that's what it is, isn't it? It's the recognizing that it is a mental illness, and so then thinking about the misconceptions that people have in the community, definitely from that show Hoarders. What are some of the misconceptions that you hear of yourself?
Probably the biggest misconception is that these people are lazy and that they're choosing to clutter things.
Yeah.
And that really makes me mad, because you wouldn't say, I mean, they do say it to some people with mental illnesses, but, you wouldn't say to somebody, oh, you've just got schizophrenia on purpose. Like, they don't demonize, the actual disease. And you don't say to somebody, who, I don't know, even if it's something as simple as, the flu, it's all your own fault, you're laying there, you're just being lazy. It's, you're not, you're sick, you've got an illness. And, I see comments on social media when it comes to discussions of people who hoard or hoarding property clean outs, always make the news. And, the comments make me really sad, because, they say, these, although just throw it all out, they just need to throw it all out. They're just being lazy. It's like, actually, they're not. These people work really hard. It takes a a lot to maintain the high volume of those belongings. And they are paddling really hard. They might be paddling in the wrong pond as far as achieving the goal of decluttering goes, but they are paddling really hard. You know, they're working, always working on moving their stuff around and trying to keep it functional and trying to keep their home, you know, functional and working. And it takes a lot of effort to do that. The last thing they are is lazy. They have a mental illness. They have compulsions and they have attachment. And, you know, those are the things that they have, and they can't, it's not their fault. It's not a choice. I mean, it's a choice sometimes with some people who hoard. They do choose to have a high volume of belongings for certain reasons. They feel safer, they feel secure, it meets an emotional need, it's a self-soothing activity. So sometimes those are choices, but they don't choose for it to have a negative effect on anyone else. That's not a choice. They're choosing, if they are choosing to have high volumes of belongings, they're choosing it for themselves. They're not actually choosing it to harm others. And that's what makes me upset when people think that or make that assumption or comment that they're just deliberately harming, you know, everyone around them. But that they're not doing that at all on purpose.
So what are some of the things that either family or friends could do to support people with hoarding behaviours?
Well, there's a difference between hoarding behaviours and hoarding disorder.
Okay.
And so with hoarding behaviours, we all have them to some degree. I had a bit of a clean out of our bedside tables recently. I pulled them out and there was this dust all behind them. And one of our bedside tables is missing its back. So it just fills with dust and I don't notice. And so I've sort of pulled that out, and recently I was cleaning it and I found, you know, a few things of mine that I was like, oh, I didn't know these were here. And they were like some old diaries. And I was thinking, you know, well, I better hang on to those. And straight away I was like, we all do this thing where we're like, oh, I have to hang on to that. You know, and there's certain things that we will stash away even though we might not use it. And those of us that are crafty will do the same thing. I have my stash of wool at the moment is slightly over capacity. And I need to do something about that before my husband says, you know, you need to get rid of this big bag of wool on the floor of the living room before I, you know, really get sick of looking at it. And so we do that. So we'll all have little collections of stuff that we're keeping for just in case, or just for when, or, you know, a spare, or, you know, you can't deal with the emotions of getting rid of them. Those kinds of things. We all sort of hoard with a lowercase h. All of us do it to some degree. It might be just one little thing, or it might be lots of things. And so if you want to help a family member with regards to their hoarding behaviours, it will be only if that person has said, I need help. That's the only time to help. So you don't offer. I mean, you can offer if they report distress. You can intervene if they're unsafe. You know, there's nothing wrong with having a conversation if someone's unsafe and saying, look, I'm really worried about you. I'm worried that you can't get out your back door because if there's a fire, there's going to be a problem. So, you know, having that conversation is fine. But just coming in and saying, you know, like, oh, can you just let me loose on your kitchen bench, please? I can't bear seeing it like this anymore. That's not the right thing to do at all. You mind your own business with regards to their kitchen bench. Unless they say to you, like, your kitchen bench is always clean and mine's always messy. Have you got any tips, or can you help out? Then you can be like, yes, I would love to help you. But until it's requested or it's a duty of care issue, you stay out of it. You keep your mouth shut. You can inspire them with your own decluttering. You can, you know, do all that kind of stuff, but it's their business, not yours. So that's probably my first tip, is only when it's a duty of care issue or they've asked for help should you intervene or offer help. Otherwise, just leave it up to them and wait until they ask you for support. And also be non-judgmental, because if you are worried about a family member and their levels of clutter, and if you are saying to them all the time, like, when are you going to get rid of that stuff? Why can't you use your spare room yet? You shouldn't have the spare room so full. And you're constantly sort of at them. And I had one client whose brother was always saying, you're just going to fall over and die one day. One day we're going to find you dead because you're going to fall over your stuff. You know, and it was like, nag. And it feels then like a judgment. Now, if somebody feels like they're being judged by somebody, that's not the person they're going to go to for help. So if you are offering a judgment in any way, you might not even know you're doing it. But if you are offering any judgment and they're feeling judged, you're not going to be the person they ask for help. So it's better to remain open so that if they do decide they want help, they feel safe saying something to you. So that's where you say, you know, you ignore the state of their house. And when they say, oh, the house is a mess, you can say, you know, oh, well, you know, mine's often a mess too, you know, non-judgmental, validating, normalizing, all that kind of stuff. And if they then said something like, I wish I knew how to clean it up, that's when you can say to them, yeah, well, if you ever want any help, let me know. You know, I think we could have some fun doing that together, you know, or something like that. Again, not, I will do it for you. Don't do that. But, I can give you a hand. I can give you some moral support while you have a go at, attacking the scary room or something like that. I can, if you need a hand, yell out. And, by you being non-judgmental, by you not offering to do it for them, not taking over, all that kind of stuff, they're going to feel much safer in asking for help.
Yeah, they're amazing tips because, yes, I hear that all the time from people ringing up and I've got this family member and it's like, hang on, are you ringing on behalf of someone else? That unless they're ringing, I'm not going to be, speaking to you in regards to this unless there is, say, dementia or something like that. But
yeah, when duty of
and
care
it's
is an issue.
yes. But otherwise it's not. So they're great tips for people to think about when they've got a family member that they're concerned about and how they can actually support them. So what about as a professional organiser? What do you do to support people with hoarding behaviour or hoarding disorder? Either one or both, you can say, yeah.
Look, there's only a few clients that I have with actual hoarding disorder. Most have really high clutter needs, or I've obviously got clients with medium needs as well. But those with high levels of clutter, it's often not necessarily caused by hoarding disorder. It's caused by something else. It's caused by a neurodiversity. It's very easy when you have executive dysfunction to allow a benign neglect to take over the house to some degree, or if you've got overwhelm, and then you have avoidance, there's that pile. And if you've got an executive dysfunction and you get overwhelmed when there are a lot of things to do, or where there are multiple steps or some complexities involved in a particular task, then your brain will not allow you to do that task. Doesn't matter how much you want to do it, your brain will be like, nah, we're not doing that. And so, that's sort of will then build up over time into levels of clutter. So people with ADHD often have, doom piles and doom boxes and piles scattered around that their brain is just refusing to let them deal with, even though the thing is annoying them and they really want it to go. They just can't, do that. That task initiation is difficult, and that overwhelm where their brain just shuts down, and I described it to my mother-in-law. She's very neurotypical, and she doesn't really understand me. And it was interesting that, I've known her for 25 years now, and we had a conversation recently about this, and I was trying to describe this ADHD overwhelm avoidance to her. And I said, okay, imagine there's like a blob of something icky on the carpet over there near the wall. And we looked at her perfect carpet, and she's like, okay, I'm imagining that. And I said, me with ADHD, and if it's my house, if it's your house, I could ignore it or I would clean it up for you. But if it's my house, I would look at that and go, ooh, there's something gross over there. I'm going to have to deal with that. And as soon as I say I'm going to have to deal with that, and as soon as I acknowledge how gross it is, this big glass wall comes up in front of me, and I can't get past that wall to the thing. I want to do it because I don't want my house smelling, or I don't want to stand in the thing, but there's this wall in the way, and I just can't do it because it's icky and it is going to involve some kind of complexity, and I have an obligation to do it. So straight away, I get all of this avoidance, executive dysfunction. And I said to her, there's ways to break down the wall. I can find something that's more icky to avoid on the other side of the room, and then all of a sudden this wall comes down, and I can do this ickiness to avoid the other worse ickiness. So that's a really great way to get something done, is to find something worse than that. Yeah. I said, or I can have a buddy come and say, let's do it together, and then the wall comes down. Or someone else can do it for me, and the wall will come down. Or I can, I'll just ignore the wall, and then all of a sudden one day it'll just be gone, and I'll just go over and do the icky thing, but it might take me 6 months to do it. And I was describing that to her, and she's like, that's just really interesting. And then she looked at me and she said, that does explain a lot. And I went, yeah, she knows me well, So I think she's been watching me over the years and puzzling over why I've had the behaviours that I've had before. And so now she's like, this is all making sense. So it's that. And so even if it's neurodiversity, if it's trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of these different obstacles that someone might have can all cause a heavily cluttered environment. And then you've got addictive personalities. You've got people who shop compulsively. They're not necessarily hoarding. They're just shopping and they don't have time to send it out as fast as it comes in. They haven't got around to it yet. And if they do, they can quite happily get rid of things. They don't have hoarding behaviours, but they have the collective behaviours, and it builds up. And people with autism have special interests, and if they've got lots of special interests, they'll bring all sorts of different things home because of that. And it's not necessarily hoarding, it's collecting, and it's not caused by hoarding disorder, it's caused by the autism. So there's so many different reasons why somebody might have a cluttered environment, and I've only just touched on a few of them. And so it's really important for professionals to understand that, labelling somebody a hoarder, first of all, is wrong. First of all, it's incorrect for a majority of cases that I've dealt with that have been called hoarders. Secondly, there is a stigma attached to that. Thirdly, you are labelling condition first. If you are labelling them with a mental illness, you're labelling condition first, not person first. People with hoarding disorder are people, they're intelligent. They've always got above average intelligence, one of the hallmarks of hoarding disorder. Above average intelligence, really high interest in things, an ability to see things that we can't see. They've got like this superpower where they can see more attributes. They've got more connections in their brain, and they can see more attributes of an item than what somebody else without the disorder can. And so, they are a whole person, and they've got hopes and they've got dreams and all that kind of stuff. And by calling them a hoarder, you're just reducing them to one of their behaviours, or you're reducing them to their mental illness. And so, using that word for a start, I try and, you've probably seen me say within our industry, don't say person with hoarding disorder or person with hoarding behaviours, because there are people, you might have some that self-identify and say, oh, I'm a hoarder.
Yeah.
That's cool. Let them roll with that. That's fine. But just don't go calling them a hoarder yourself. Just maintain that level of professionalism, and use appropriate language around mental illness is quite important to reduce stigma and stuff like that. So, as professionals, we have to understand, there's all these different reasons. And because there are all these different reasons, there are all these different approaches. And so, again, it has to come down to a person-centred approach. Like, what is this behaviour? Where is this behaviour coming from? And then how can we tackle it from the direction it needs to be tackled in that the client wants to or is comfortable doing? And then also understanding that people have complex relationships with their belongings. They have different needs to us, and they have different tolerance levels to us, and they have different thoughts about things to us. Some clients will really anthropomorphise objects, and some professional organisers wouldn't even consider anthropomorphising something. But, the fact that my client will say to me, if I get rid of those 3 teddies, then the other 3 will have survivor guilt. It's that real thing. Like, they really think like that. And by saying to her, don't be stupid, teddies don't have feelings, or like, what are you talking about? Why would a teddy have survivor guilt? By saying that, we're, again, not seeing it from that client's perspective. And so all of these things are really important. And I think a lot of people will go into other people's homes with their own lens on and without putting that client's lens on. And so they go in and they dictate the terms of what's going to happen. They're the ones who dictate how long the session is going to be. They dictate, what language to use. They dictate how the paperwork is done. Everything's dictated by. Whereas if you're looking at clients with complex needs, you need to look at it from their perspective. Can they process, all of this information? Can they process that in the same way that someone else might? Do you need to adjust anything to suit that? I had one client who emailed me, and she was brilliant. She sent me this really long email, and obviously she's really self-aware, and she's obviously dealt with a lot of service providers. And she just said to me, these are the things that I need from you. I need emails that are less than 3 dot points. I need you to say things very clearly. I cannot understand grey areas. I'm very literal. Do not use sarcasm with me. Do not expect me to read between the lines. Do not expect me to understand what you're saying unless you've actually said it. Expect me to take everything you say completely literally. And it was really helpful
that's great.
Get those guidelines. And if you don't get, and most clients won't tell you that, you have to figure this stuff out yourself because they don't know to tell you. But one of the things I teach other professional organisers when working with complex cases is tell them that you understand they have needs and that they are able to express them. Tell them it's okay to stim in front of you. Tell them it's okay to cry. Tell them you understand if they need to go and disappear for 10 minutes and be on their own. Tell them all of these things so that they feel like, okay, this person gets me. I can act myself. I can do things that I need to do, instead of like my client who had this 5-hour session. And she said, she was only half an hour in before she was feeling really anxious. And so for 2 hours,
she just went going.
Through.
Wow.
Yeah, she just kept going. And eventually, and I said to her that I was so proud of her for stopping the session, because, she could have tried to go for the whole 5 hours, but she knew her limits, and she eventually plucked up the courage to say, this isn't working for me. It has to end. You must leave. You have to leave now. And she said, I'm upset and but, she said, you have to leave now.
Yeah.
And so that's and I had a client say to me once, you have to leave now. And I'm like, I'm so sorry that I missed that cue earlier. I'm really, I'm really sorry. And she said, it's okay. She said, I didn't really tell you properly, but I've reached my limit now. And I said, okay. And then we wrapped it up and I left. And then we checked back in a week later and we're all good. And then we made some changes to how we were going to do things next time. I was, going to check in with her sooner. She was going to check in with herself sooner. We were going to sort of work that out. But those are the things that we need, the conversations that are really helpful to have, so that you don't traumatize a client.
Definitely.
By doing something that's sort of not in the realms of their capabilities or their energy levels, and use up all the spoons in the first half an hour of the session.
You've put it just so beautifully, Beck, because I love that it's like you've rounded out what sometimes our job looks like so well, because there's so much more to it than just making a beautiful pantry or a drawer look nice. There's so much more to the job as a professional organiser than meets the eye, really, isn't there? It's all about communication and working with the person, and it's people relationships, isn't it? Building relationships. Yeah,
absolutely. It's making sure, and it's all about making sure people are safe. Everyone's safe.
Yes.
You have to be safe and your client has to be safe. And as far as vulnerable clients go, safety is really important. And safety doesn't just mean, that you're picking up after yourself so that your client doesn't fall over. Safety means checking on them and saying, do you need to take a break?
Oh, yeah, the emotional part.
That.
Yeah, definitely.
Safety and that energy safety and all of that.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are really important. And, you still can. And this is the thing. There are professional organisers out there who don't really work with the clients at all. They go in and the client says, go do the pantry for me. Don't care what you do, just make it look amazing and make it functional for me. And I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that. Here, do it like this. And then the organiser can go in and do that. And that's great. There's definitely a need for that service.
Yes,
there are clients who just want someone to come in and go, make it amazing for me, and I'll be back in 4 hours, and that's cool. And I think the responsibility of professional organisers is to understand which client you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a client that can handle this, can do that, or are you dealing with a client that needs this? And it's working that out and making sure that it's completely client-centric and person-centred, the approach that you take, and that everyone is on the same page, everyone knows what everyone else is doing, what their responsibilities, what their expectations are, all of that kind of stuff. It's really important. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Beck, for joining me. How can people connect with you?
I'm on www.rebeccamezzino.com.au.
Thank you so much for your time, Beck. It's been so lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Simply Happy conversation. If you'd like to reduce your paper and digital clutter and free yourself from the overwhelm of clutter so that you can claim back time and space to enjoy the things you love, head over to simplyhappy.com.au in the resource section and grab the declutter checklist and start to reduce your clutter even with small amounts of time. I'd like to acknowledge the Wathaurong people of the Kulin Nation on which this podcast is recorded as the traditional custodians of the land. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging.